Greetings. This video, which I'm titling 1Westisms Beyond One West, will be a brief exploration of situations where we encounter a phenomenon that is today popularly associated with One West, yet we find it amongst a non-One West group or amongst persons who are considered outside of the One West stream, and what we should think when we encounter those sorts of phenomenon. I want to begin with this disclaimer. This video does not seek to present a conclusive argument. Rather, the intention here is only to share some interesting bits of historical information which can later be built upon as more information comes in and a better understanding develops. I think this is an important disclaimer because sometimes people see my videos that are more stages in an ongoing attempt to grasp the larger history, and people are left wondering, well, what's the point of this video? So I wanted to put that up front, that this video will not be presenting any sort of formal conclusion or anything conclusive. It's just going to explore some interesting bits of what might be called historical trivia and attempt to develop some basic rules of thumb moving forward. So I wanted to make this video after seeing a number of people discussing the DJVlad YouTube account's recent snippets of a larger interview that it did with the world boxing champion Zab Judah. And one person in particular who's interested in the One West spectrum sent me the clip to ask me what I thought because of something that Zab Judah said towards the end of the first part where he talks about growing up as an Israelite. So I'm going to play a quick clip from the DJVlad account. This was aired on March 8th, and the title of the video is Zab Judah on Being Undisputed Champ Like Tyson, both from Brownsville, Part 1. Here we go.
Okay, but your dad was Jewish.
My dad, yeah, I was born and raised Hebrew Israelite.
Okay, so you went to the synagogue and studied the Torah?
Yeah, we had our own camp. Yeah, we did all that.
So many knew that Zab Judah grew up as an Israelite, but what caught people's ear was the use of the word camp.
Yeah, we had our own camp. Yeah, we had our own camp.
Now, admittedly, that by itself is inconclusive. That could mean anything. There are churches and schools and boys' clubs that have their own camps in the sense of summer camps. However, some were interpreting that as meaning something akin to the way that One Westers use the word camp. For those who don't know, aside from calling them One Westers, the different groups within the One West spectrum are often called campers by people outside of that spectrum because they refer to their places of preaching and speaking on the street as camps. Now, again, admittedly, this is a very minor thing and one should not build too much out of it, but it does at least raise a somewhat interesting question, which is what sort of Israelite group or Israelite spectrum was Zab Judah's father in? It turns out that Zab Judah's father, Yoel, was a member of the group known as Zaken. And that's interesting, as we can transition from that brief interview with Zab Judah to the interesting subject of Zaken and its proximity to One West. So let's take a look at Zaken briefly. It turns out that back in December of 2017, on Vocab Malone's channel, there was a show titled ABBA, BIVENS, and AHRAYAH, a Hebrew Israelite secret, in which Vocab and I discussed mainly the studies and the videos and the interviews of Uzziel Lewi regarding ABBA, BIVENS, but there was a brief segue of a few minutes on the topic of Zaken. And so I'd like to recount what was covered there in that video from December of 2017. So I'm going to play about 5 minutes of the footage from that discussion, and it was leading into a video by Uzziel Lewi from 2016. So I'm going to just play a few minutes of what happened on Vocab show, and then it's going to transition directly into an excerpt from Uzziel Lewi's interview with NASI BARAK. Here we go.
Can I segue into the thing about Zaken and Landis?
Of course.
Okay, yeah, Landing. I keep saying Landis. I'm sorry, James E. Landing, Black Judaism, right? Well, whatever the case. There you go. In this book, he doesn't really, talk about One West. Never comes up in this book, but something in that book. So this is about it's about African American converts to mainstream rabbinic Judaism, and it's also about Israelite groups to some extent, but it never gets into the One West stream. But interestingly, he talks about I think the guy's name was Cole or Coleman. You might be able to find him in the index. There was a African-American convert to specifically the Lubavitcher interpretation of Orthodox Judaism, of Hasidic Judaism. And this guy in the 70s used to write about the Israelite groups that he would come into contact with, and he would sort of write polemics against them. So you have a African-American convert to Orthodox Judaism, specifically the Lubavitcher interpretation of such, and he's interacting with Hebrew Israelites in New York and writing about them. Now, the interesting thing about that is about 10 years ago, I read a little bit about this guy. I think his name is Rabbi Coleman. And he had said that in 1974, he encountered a group which... By the way,
real quick, there's Rabbi Coleman.
That's him. That's him right there. So this is a guy, he was a member of Chabad. I have no idea if he's still alive, but he was a member of Chabad, of the Lubavitcher sect, which is based in Crown Heights and Eastern Parkway. This guy, Rabbi Coleman, he wrote about a group in roughly 1974 that he encountered them, and it was an Israelite group in New York who said that they study Torah, and he said, well, can I see your Torah scroll? And they presented a King James Bible. And he also said that they wore turbans. So they're King James onlyists, they're turban wearing King James onlyists in New York. You know, it sounds like he's describing One Westers. And this always boggled my mind. I was like, is this the earliest reference to One West in print? But Landing himself says that this is a reference to B'nai Zaken.
Here it is.
Go ahead.
Page 296. Page 296. I'm going to read it real quick.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so this is I believe this is actually this is from Coleman's own pen here.
Yes.
And it says this: one group of black Israelites, which was recently accused of shaking down merchants and organizing gangs in Brooklyn, that in and of itself is significant, which has 12 tribes with chiefs and a NASI or prince as its overall spiritual leader. In an interview a few months ago with one of the chiefs who wore a turban, earrings, and medallions with a lion's head carved on it, I inquired as to whether or not they had classes in Jewish studies and also with which of the three movements they identified themselves. I was told that they had class in Torah nightly and was shown a copy of the King James Version of the Bible with the New Testament as proof. I was also assured that they davened every Sabbath at the camp, the name by which they called their place of worship, and that they don tefillin every Sabbath. Jews do not pray with tefillin on the Sabbath or holidays, it says. So
I'm glad he mentioned the camp as well. So everything, the lion, the turban, the King James Bible, calling their system a camp. Interesting. Sounds like One Westers. But if I'm not mistaken, either in a footnote or an endnote, Landing clarifies, no, this is B'nai Zaken. And so this sort of left me confused. I've wondered about this. B'nai Zaken, I don't know anything about them.
Oh, yeah, okay, here it is. It's on page 311. It's footnote 76 in the chapter titled Congregations in New York Since 1930. This congregation was B'nai Zaken, see above.
So I used to, when I read this, the first time I read this as someone with interested in One West history, I used to think, what is B'nai Zaken? And because it sounds like he's describing One West. Here's the interesting thing. The only reason we went on this long segue is the guy who's speaking, he sort of bridged the gap for me. This guy is a student of B'nai Zaken who went to study with ABBA BIVENS and showed his members, he taught them how to tie the turban. So B'nai Zaken had turbans, One West had turbans, and that the reason One West had turbans is because they inherited it from ABBA BIVENS. And where did ABBA BIVENS get it? His school got it from this guy, NASI BARAK, who brought it from B'nai Zaken. That's because of Uzziel Lewi's interview, I suddenly was able to bridge that gap, 10 years after wondering about it.
What about, do you know the history of the turban, the turban that we commonly use in this suit on, but he had the turban, the style that we use right now. Where did you learn to wrap that turban at?
I learned it from B'nai Zaken, from a brother named Yehuda. He taught me with a little short turban like this. You know, Shaka, your brother Shaka. Little short turban like this. He said, if you were to wrap this, you can wrap it in turban, right? You know, a little short turban, man. Little short turban, and I learned. And then after a while, learn all the striped with different colors, but I just leave it simple, with me, simplicity.
So were you the one who took it to Pop Bivens' place?
Yeah.
The wrapping of the turban?
Right, yeah.
So 125th Street? Okay.
Okay, after showing those two excerpts from 2017 and 2016 respectively, we're back in 2020, and I wanted to show that to offer this rule of thumb, to offer a lesson that we learned from that. See, we had a situation where in roughly 1974, B'nai Zaken was looking quite a bit like One West. And the impulse that people today might have is to say, well, then maybe B'nai Zaken simply copied from One West. However, it seems that at least with some of the things they had in common, the flow of ideas was going in the opposite direction. And that provides us with an interesting rule of thumb. The lesson that we learned from this example of B'nai Zaken is that if you see a group, a non-One West group, that bears some similarity to One West, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's copying or borrowing or learning from One West or breaking off from One West. It's possible that the flow of ideas may have gone in the opposite direction. Let's keep that in mind moving forward. Some viewers may recall that from my video on the identity of ABBA BIVENS, I showed this directory, which was compiled by the group Hatzad Harishon, which was a directory of Israelite groups that existed in mainly the northeastern United States in the late 60s and the early 70s. And one of the groups which appeared on that directory was Beth Hephzibah, which was in Philadelphia. So I'd like to take a look at George Chadwick's Beth Hephzibah. So I actually got my hands on a copy of this book, which was put out by Beth Hephzibah in the 70s, in the early 70s. You see there, Elder George Chadwick is one of the authors of this book. Interesting, at the top, you'll see the Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, and then there's the rabbinic addition to that, which is Baruch Shem Chavod Malchut Olam Vaya. That's interesting because it shows the rabbinic influence on Beth Hephzibah in the early 70s. But anyway, in here you see the date. It was published and printed in 1974. But what I mainly want to focus on is on the cover. So specifically down in the bottom left-hand corner of the book right here. Look at this picture here. On the cover of this book put out by Beth Hephzibah in the 1970s, in 1974, there's a picture of a man wearing a t-shirt. And on his t-shirt is the tribes chart, which is now associated with One West. And it's pretty much the exact chart. You can see there at the top line, Judah is associated with so-called Negroes, quote-unquote. Benjamin is West Indians, Levi, Haitian, Simeon, Dominicans, Zebulon, Panamanians, and on it goes. Ephraim is Puerto Ricans, and you can see Gad is Native American, quote-unquote Indians, Asher is Brazilians, and so on it goes. So that's an interesting detail. In 1974, an apparently non-One West group in Philadelphia, Beth Hephzibah, had the same tribes chart that's now popularly associated with One West. Now, I don't know at this time much more than that. I've spoken to a couple of people who were members of Beth Hephzibah, but unfortunately in the early 80s, and they told me that the tribes chart would still pop up in Beth Hephzibah's literature and like their newsletter in the early 80s, but I have yet to speak to anyone who can go all the way back to the early 70s. Hopefully, if I can acquire more information, I'll share it then. But nonetheless, this is an interesting detail that a non-One West group was using the tribes chart in 1974. Now, of course, at this point, someone might feel that the easiest conclusion is that in the 70s, Beth Hephzibah was somehow influenced by One West. Maybe it was led or started or drew members from someone who was at One West, or, you know, the easy conclusion is that however they acquired the tribes chart, Beth Hephzibah simply took it from One West. Now, maybe that's true, but at this point, we should recall the lesson of B'nai Zaken from earlier in this video. If a non-One West group has something in common with One West, that doesn't necessarily mean that the non-One West group got it from One West. It's at least possible for the flow of ideas to go in the opposite direction. Now, in closing, as I said at the outset, there was no intention to put forth any sort of formal conclusion in this video. Just the general theme is that the spectrum of Israelite groups beyond One West in the late 60s and early 70s, and the degree to which One West was a product of his environment, remains an open question and a subject for further study. On that note, I look forward to the comments of others, especially anything else others might have to share, and as always, God bless.